Why is it so hard to start journaling? In a world dominated by alerts and algorithms, a surprising number of people are turning back to something simpler, a pen and paper. But for every person who finds clarity through journaling, 10 have tried and given up. I was nearly one of them. After a decade of experimentation, I finally landed on an approach that helped me untangle my thoughts and unlock ideas I didn't even know I had, but I could have gotten here sooner. In this video, I'll share 5 things I wish I knew when I started journaling, so you can skip the false starts and find a practice that's just as life-changing for you as it's been for me. If you look at the daily routines of famously creative people, the ones who didn't keep some kind of journal seem to be the exception. Virginia Woolf, Marcus Aurelius, Frida Kahlo, Andy Warhol, writers, philosophers, artists, they all use journals in different ways. Some to process difficult emotions, others to capture the forgettable details of life, and for many, a journal was the place where the fragile beginnings of their creative masterpieces first emerged. So in 2015, inspired by these examples and countless others, I decided to give journaling a go. And what started out as a simple experiment has become the single most important habit in my life. It's a place that reliably turns confusion into clarity and overthinking into action. But it wasn't love at first sight. I found it unbelievably difficult to start, even harder to stick with, and for the longest time, I had no idea whether it was helping or not. And it's for these reasons, I think anyway, that so many people who start journaling quit, frustrated that such a simple practice that's worked for many people before them didn't quite unlock the clarity or the insight that they were hoping for. It's taken me 10 years to find the journaling practice that actually works for me. But there are a bunch of things that I've learned along the way that, had I have known sooner, would have made it easier to stick to in the beginning and probably would have helped me start seeing some benefits a little bit sooner. So let's get into that. And if you get to the credits, then let me know. When I started journaling about 10 years ago, I was living in London and I had so many good things going on in my life, but I was surrounded by really high achieving friends. And for some reason, I just had this sort of low level feeling of inadequacy. Like maybe I wasn't where I was supposed to be, or perhaps worse, I wasn't fulfilling my potential. So I told a friend about the way I was feeling, and they suggested that I try gratitude journaling, a really simple practice where every day you just write down 3 things that you're grateful for. So I gave it a go. And for a little while, it helped. I was paying more attention to what was going right in my life, and that felt good. But after a few weeks, it started to feel off. I'd sit there each night trying to summon 3 upbeat things to write, and if I couldn't find them, I felt like even my journal was telling me I'd had a depressing day. So after a few months of guilting myself into it, I gave up. I figured journaling just wasn't for me. At the time, there wasn't all the content that exists now about the many different ways of journaling, and I guess I thought that this gratitude-based approach was just the way of doing it, and because it didn't work for me, maybe I just wasn't the journaling type. But here's what I wish I knew back then. If a particular method doesn't feel right, it doesn't mean that journaling isn't for you. It might just mean you haven't found your way of doing it yet. Some people thrive on prompts and repetition, whereas other people just need a blank page. They need to write what's on their mind. There's no one right way of doing this. There are many methods. And if I was to start again, then I'd try lots of different methods. I'd try writing at different times of the day. And if something didn't work, I would just treat that as learning rather than a reason to quit. So if your first attempts at journaling haven't quite felt right, don't assume that journaling just isn't for you. It might be that you just haven't found the way that works for you yet. And if you're curious about some of the methods that I've tried and loved over the years, then stick around. I will share a few of those at the end of the video. If you grew up before smart devices became omnipresent, you probably had a lot of stationery as a kid. I went to school in the 90s, and every year before term started, the real back-to-school excitement wasn't new shoes, it was a trip to the stationery shop. Gel pens, fresh notebooks, maybe a scented eraser or 2, a special fountain pen for handwriting practice. It was joyful, tactile. The tools mattered. They made the act of writing feel exciting. But somewhere along the way, I fell out of the habit, and by the time I got to university, aside from my finals, I pretty much stopped writing by hand altogether. So when I started journaling, for the first few years, I didn't really think much about the tools. I'd grab a cheap pen from the drawer and a scrappy notebook stolen from the stationery cupboard at work. The pen would scratch across the page like it was protesting, and the notebook would refuse to lay flat. Instead of focusing on what I wanted to say, I would constantly find myself distracted by how irritating the process was. So after a while, I got really fed up with that and I started experimenting different pens, different papers, different weights, different textures. And slowly but surely, I rediscovered the simple joy of writing. I found a pen that sat comfortably in my hand, paper with just the right amount of texture for the pen to bite without it becoming distracting. Journaling became something I looked forward to rather than something I had to guilt myself into. Journaling is meant to be a moment of reflection, and the tools should support that. They should sort of just disappear into the background, leaving only the thought that this feels nice. So what I'd say is, don't overlook the materials. Visit a proper stationery shop, try a heavy pen, a light pen, try different notebooks and paper brands, and find something that feels right for you. Because when the tools feel good, the practice, it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like a pleasure, sort of like a morning smoothie that you might look forward to, as opposed to a giant vitamin pill that you feel obliged to take. And that small shift might be the thing that helps journaling stick. When I started journaling, I think that I was expecting magic. I'd read all of these stories of famously creative people that had used journaling as a way of processing all kinds of difficult thoughts, and in some cases, unlocking completely new creative worlds. And I think that I was expecting that the same would happen for me. But I also assumed that I could put very little in and get miracles out. And of course, that didn't happen. Looking back at my early entries, I can see that I was holding back. I was writing a version of a journal I wouldn't have minded someone else reading. Whether I was trying to work through something difficult or generate new creative ideas, it was all just a bit bland, a bit safe. I don't think I wasn't willing to be vulnerable. I was trying to sound thoughtful or clever or stoic, maybe, and to avoid writing anything that my future self would cringe at. But the moment I gave myself permission, and I don't know when this was, but permission to write things that were childish or really naive, petty or insecure, it was at that moment that I actually started to get some benefit from it. I started being honest. I let myself put bad ideas on the page. I wrote things I'd never say out loud. And once I got that stuff out of the way, there was finally room for something else. New ideas, better ideas, the kind that had been out of reach when I was trying too hard. And when I put all that embarrassing stuff down on paper, I realized that for the most part, it wasn't that embarrassing at all. I could see it for what it was, mostly noise or emotional weather. And often it just sort of passed on its own. And even when it didn't, then I could dress appropriately and could choose to head out into the rain regardless. So what I wish I knew sooner was that in order to get something real out of this practice, I was going to have to put something real in, to be willing to look a little bit foolish in my own eyes, to tell the truth, even when it felt messy, and trust that a bit of honesty on the page might help me find a little bit of clarity in life. Hey, if you're still watching the video at this point, then believe it or not, you're part of a group of only about 20% of people who will make it this far. This year, I've set myself an outrageous goal of trying to get to 50,000 subscribers. So if you're enjoying the video and you think that you can help me out with reaching that goal, then I'd be so grateful if you subscribe to the channel. And if you choose to do that, I'd also love it if you could let me know in the comments why you decided to help me out. Thank you so much. If you watch any of my recent videos, you'll know that I kept a digital journal for years. It was a really simple practice inspired by the book Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky. Every night before bed, I'd open the Notes app on my phone and type out a single highlight of my day. That was it. And because it was so simple, I managed to maintain that habit for years. But over time, I started to notice some unintended consequences. Because I was doing it on my phone, even without thinking about it, as soon as I finished my journal, I'd just keep going. 15, 20 minutes deeper into some kind of rabbit hole, consuming information that I just didn't really need and that was making my brain much noisier right before going to sleep. What could have been 15 minutes of quiet conversation in bed with my wife turned into me staring at a screen in the dark, cycling through social media, email, Google Chrome, and then back again. Now, in theory, digital journals are brilliant, aren't they? Because you can tag the information, make it searchable, use AI to summarize it all. But in order to get the most out of a digital journal, it assumes that the human doing the journaling is in fact not a human at all. It assumes they are a robot, someone who, never acts against their own best intentions, never drifts off, never gets distracted. No, I'm not that person. I constantly act against my own best interests. What I've found is that when I write in a paper journal, I just write. There's nowhere else to click, no tabs open, no dopamine loop waiting just behind the page. It's slower, less efficient. But that slowness is it's not a bug. It's a feature. It slows me down just enough to notice what I'm actually thinking. I sometimes wonder if Leonardo da Vinci had kept his journals and his commonplace books in Apple Notes, would we still have them? All those sketches, all those half-finished thoughts. Would he have actually made them? Or would he have, got distracted by Candy Crush and never recorded a thing? I say that sort of half as a joke because that's probably exactly what I would have done. So the lesson for me is this: I just wish I'd abandoned doing this digitally sooner. Not because it's bad, but because the slower, more analog approach is the one that actually works for me. When I started journaling, I was convinced that for it to work, it had to be something I did every single day, come rain or shine, no matter what was going on in my life. Now, I've got no idea where that idea came from. It's sort of like I was trying to prove something to who, I don't know, but trying to stick to this every single day over time just made me come to resent it. I'd miss a day and feel annoyed at myself, then I'd miss another and start thinking I'd failed. And once I'd broken the streak, it became much harder to get back into it. Now, I probably write about 15 times a week in a journal, sometimes more, but that didn't happen overnight. It built slowly because it became something I wanted to do and not something I was forcing myself to do. So if I was to start over, I would opt for something simpler. I'd try to do it daily-ish. Now, that sounds a bit woolly, but if you try and do something daily-ish, you'll realize very quickly that you know if you're doing it or not. You know that 2 days out of 7 doesn't count, 5 does. And if life's a bit full, then 3 or 4 is perfectly fine for a while. I didn't need a rigid rule or a perfect streak. Daily-ish would have been enough. Enough to get the rhythm going, to feel the benefits, and to learn what kind of practice would actually work for me. Okay, so you made it to the credits. At the beginning of this video, I said that I would share some journaling methods to help you get started. And in the video up here, I walk through 3 ways I use a journal right now to help me work through my worries, to capture life's boring but beautiful moments, and to make progress on creative ideas. If you're looking for a bit of structure to help you get started, or you're just looking for ways to help you spend less time on your phone, then I think you'll find it useful. Thank you so much for watching.